Mark Rothko loved music and was obsessed with Mozart, which he listened to as he painted. A classicist like Mozart might not be the first composer we think of when we look at Rothko's abstract paintings. But Rothko considered Mozart's stylistic and formal principles a direct influence on his art. In Mozart, he saw a fellow artist who, like him, had rejected artifice in favour of clarity of line and simplicity of structure. What Rothko had called the simple expression of complex thought. Mozart's music is so balanced, clear and rational in its order that it is easy to miss the drama. And it is drama that unites Mozart and Rothko. When Rothko was asked why he admired Mozart more than any other composer, he replied, because Mozart was always smiling through tears. It is not uncommon for people to get emotional or to even cry when listening to music. However, visual arts rarely invoke those same emotions. Rothko wanted to do with paint what Mozart had done with music. On the 25th of February 1970, the Tate Gallery in London received 9 Mark Rothko canvases, a generous donation from the artist himself. A few hours later, Rothko was found dead in his studio on East 69th Street in Manhattan. The 66-year-old painter had taken his own life. He was found in a pool of blood 6 by 8 feet wide, roughly the size of one of his paintings. His suicide would change everything and shape the way we respond to his work. Rothko was aware that people often burst into tears when confronted with his painting. He said, "I'm interested only in expressing basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on." Mark Rothko was born Marcus Rothkovitz in 1903 in Dvinsk, part of the Russian Empire. He was born to a family of left-wing intellectual atheists, and he retained those beliefs until the day he died. After anti-Semitic persecution in Russia, his family moved to the US when he was 10. They arrived as immigrants speaking no English at Ellis Island in late 1913. Only 8 years later, Rothkovitz, an academic prodigy, was accepted into Yale University on a scholarship. But he found himself once more an outsider, stigmatized as a Jew. So he dropped out and moved to New York, with ambitions to be an artist. He attended classes and became friends with young experimental artists, including Barnett Newman, Jackson Pollock, Adolf Gottlieb, Robert Motherwell, and Clifford Still. Later, they would create a new visual language and be known as the Abstract Expressionists, a term Rothko disliked. Over the years, Rothko went through many artistic styles until reaching his signature motif of soft rectangular forms floating on a stained field of colour. Rothko, who grew up poor, struggled for money throughout his career, but by the 1950s his paintings were finally beginning to sell. Then in 1958, the relatively unknown and middle-aged artist received his first major commission. Seagram Distilleries offered Rothko $35,000 to create 600 square feet of mural-scale canvases for the dining room of their new corporate headquarters on Park Avenue in New York. The Four Seasons restaurant, outfitted with plants, pools, expensive stone, and a world-class art collection, would serve as a reflection of the power and opulence of 1950s Manhattan. $35,000 was an enormous sum in 1958, and the commission would bring Rothko's left-wing views into conflict. In the summer of 1959, Rothko and his family were on their second of 3 long journeys to Europe. At the ancient Greco-Roman site of Paestum in Italy, while they picnicked, 2 young Italian guides learned Rothko was a painter and asked if he was there to paint the temples. Rothko replied, "I have been painting Greek temples all my life, without knowing it." Rothko was deeply fascinated with the history of art. In 1949, the Museum of Modern Art in New York acquired this painting by Matisse. It profoundly affected Rothko, who spent almost every day for months standing in front of it. Matisse's use of colour was one of the key factors that influenced the evolution of his work. Then in the late 50s, the time of the Seagram Commission, he would move away from the bright intense colours towards deep reds, maroons and black, inspired by his trips to Europe. Many of the places he visited in 1959 he had previously visited in 1950. In Florence, he saw Michelangelo's Laurentian Library, which he admitted was an important influence for his murals. The library, with its classical window frames that instead of letting in light are blocked off, had exactly the oppressive feeling that he wanted for his Seagram Commission. The library is a very early example of architecture, deliberately shaped not for function but to alter your sense of space. Rothko's murals would use these architectural allusions, the idea of space, windows, doors and portals. In Pompeii, he visited the Villa of the Mysteries. He was struck by the use of surprisingly deep colours for a decorative scheme, black and red. Rothko sensed a deep affinity between the wall paintings and the Seagram murals. He said they had the same feeling, the same broad expanse of sombre colour. But it was more than just colour for Rothko. The rooms are said to be part of an underground worship of Dionysus, who relates to the sensual, spontaneous and emotional aspects of human nature. Friedrich Nietzsche had written about Dionysus in The Birth of Tragedy, and this book was the most crucial philosophical influence on Rothko. Nietzsche's idea that art should dramatize the terror and struggles of existence struck a chord with Rothko, whose work aimed to invoke such primal emotions. He was already deeply familiar with the Roman wall paintings from Bosco Real. One of the frescoes there could quite easily be a Rothko, if we remove the figures. But in particular, it was Fra Angelico's frescoes in Florence that excited Rothko the most. He found something unexpectedly contemporary about the interaction of image and space. Rothko aspired to do what Fra Angelico does, create in the viewer a feeling of contemplation, of transcendence, of having been transported to another, purer world. For Rothko, an atheist, there was no other world, but like Nietzsche, Rothko felt that what he called tragic art could give meaning to life in a modern, secularized world. The trip was invaluable to Rothko. Seeing work in spaces it was designed for, rather than museums, was inspiring and revelatory. He became fascinated by the idea of creating a room with his art, using abstract painting as a type of architecture. Rothko's work is very labour-intensive and uses many different techniques and materials. To really appreciate a Rothko, you need to see it in the flesh, and give it time to reveal itself. It's simple, the more you look, the more you will see. For these works, Rothko rented a former gymnasium on 222 Bowery. He then constructed a scaffold in the studio to match the exact dimensions of the restaurant. He had a pulley system to raise and lower the paintings, not just to help him paint them, but also to try and get a sense of where they would go in the room. He would start with sketches, working out proportions, and then make several maquettes of where they would be hung. For these works, he altered his usual horizontal format to vertical, to complement the restaurant's features. As his colours got darker from 1957, so did his prime coats. These canvases were primed with a base coat of deep maroon paint in rabbit skin glue. The glue will tighten the fabric as well as make it stiff. Layers and layers of red paint were then added in fast brushstrokes using big 5-inch house painter's brushes. The paint was thinned using lots of turpentine to form a wash or stain. You can think of it almost like a watercolour technique translated into the oil painting medium. We can see here on the back of the canvas how the paint has penetrated differently depending on the wash used. Rothko would muddy the edges between the blocks of colour, creating a sense of movement and depth. Later he will use those same household brushes to get the feathered edges, as we can see here. As he painted, Rothko would sit and consider the painting for long periods of time, sometimes hours, sometimes days, staring at the canvas. At times, paint drips can be seen running upwards or sideways across the surface. This is because Rothko often inverted a picture while working on it, sometimes changing the final orientation at a late stage. Imperfections like these are found in most of Rothko's work. They remind us of the human touch. Remind us that viewing these paintings is an interaction between two people, Rothko and us. His works are designed to be seen up close so that the viewer would feel engulfed by them. For this series of work, Rothko departed from his usual choice of dead flat matte finishes, and instead he introduced changeable subtle surfaces by creating a play of matte and gloss. The paintings change as we walk around them. If the light catches it, shapes seem to hover. Then as we move around, the colour shifts and we slip back into the deep reds. Unlike Rothko's earlier lighter-hued paintings, these dark paintings reveal themselves slowly. They are very complex paintings that require a lot of time, maybe more time than the average restaurant goer could spare. In 1959, Rothko and his wife Mel returned from Europe and booked a table at the newly opened Four Seasons restaurant where his paintings were to be installed. It was not a happy evening. The next day, in an absolute rage, he announced he was sending back the money and withdrawing his paintings, saying, "Anybody who will eat that kind of food for those kind of prices will never look at a painting of mine." It seems that Rothko always felt ambivalent about the commission, as his contract had a clause which would allow him to back out of the deal and retrieve his paintings if necessary. It has been said that Rothko believed his works would hang in a meeting room, that they would be accessible to ordinary workers. This would fit in with Rothko as the artist of the people, but it sounds far-fetched. Evidence shows that Rothko knew exactly where the paintings were going and wanted to make a statement. On the European trip, Rothko told John Fisher, a journalist, that he had been working for several months on the paintings. He told Fisher he wanted to upset, offend and torture the diners with paintings that will make those rich bastards feel like they are trapped in a room where all the doors and windows are bricked up, so that all they can do is butt their heads forever against the wall. It is possible that Rothko, who had often described himself as an anarchist, had accepted the commission as an act of subversion, that he saw it as a way of biting the hand that fed him. But as they ate their expensive meal amongst the wealthy elite of Manhattan, as waiters buzzed around the crowded, noisy restaurant, as diners ordered wine worth hundreds of dollars, Rothko must have realized that his art wouldn't change anything. Even worse, it would be seen just as decoration. Rothko never fully explained his conflicted emotions over the incident, and the canvases were put into storage. Years later, after a series of lengthy negotiations with the Tate Gallery in London, he donated 9 of them to the museum, where they still hang today. By 1970, his marriage had collapsed. Rothko, a heavy drinker who smoked several packs of cigarettes a day and took 5 to 6 different types of medication, had suffered from depression all his life. As his depression increased, it had enveloped his painting. His palette had moved from yellows to oranges and reds, to darker purples, greens, and then maroons, to the final greys and blacks, which have been interpreted by some as pictorial suicide notes. It is inevitable that his suicide would give every painting a terrible significance. After his death, the Tate Gallery set up Rothko's works to exact specifications by the artist in a room of their own. A room that to this day has an uncanny silence. In an increasingly secular age, Rothko's room has taken on the aura of a temple or shrine. It is somewhere to sit quietly with one's thoughts, to contemplate. A place where we can find peace. Rothko himself never found peace, but he has created a place that moves us to a kind of inner illumination. A place that is as complex and as simple as music.